Morning, everybody. Across all of our locations, glad that you're here. Lost that hour of sleep. How we doing? Some of you look a little too cozy. Come on, get awake, get with me here. I'm excited to preach today. It's been 2 months since I was able to preach, and hear this from me. I'm really grateful for that. It's been quite a busy season. Over the past couple of years, I've liked to make fun of my job title here at Northway. In case you forgot, I'm the executive pastor of Generosity and Expansion. Like, come on. Never been such a greater title than that. These last couple of months have been crazy, though, because as you probably just heard maybe at your location, the 7th Northway location is happening after Easter. In the South Hills, we've got a great little space that we're going to launch out of. Part of my role is to continue to look for that next permanent space. So, also Deep and Wide is part of my responsibility. That's our year-end giving initiative. And in case you didn't hear, $1.2 million was received this year through Deep and Wide. So I have yet to be able to say personally to you, thank you. Like, seriously, thank you so much for your giving and getting in on that vision. That resource, a bunch of it goes right out to help our global mission partners, as you can see, to campus expansion. A lot of it stays right at your local location. And one of the things we did this year was some of those resources, we took a small portion and we reduced the cost of this family and marriage conference that we have coming next weekend down to just $5. So the idea for that is buy a bunch of tickets and invite a bunch of friends to that. It's Mark Batterson is going to be here to lead that. He is an extremely influential multi-site church leader, National Community Church in DC. Now hear this from me. I get it. Some of you are saying like, I have no idea who that is. I do. I've met Mark a couple times. He is one of the early innovators in multi-site church. Here's what he did. He had this vision in the DC area to create churches in movie theaters at sort of the transit stops of all around the DC area. And he has made an incredible impact in that community. He wrote a book years ago called In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day that's still probably one of my top 10 favorite books. He wrote another book called Circle Maker that literally changed the way that I pray for my wife, for my kids, for some of you when I pray for you. He'll be presenting a lot of material just on relationships, on prayer, on marriages, on parenting. And here's what I can say about his material and who he is. You're going to get something out of this. It's practical. It's really solid. It's really simple to get a hold of. I vouch for Mark Batterson. I really try to make an effort to be at this. So yes, I've been involved with generosity and involved with expansion, but guess what? Guess who you're looking at right here? I recently became the interim director of safety and security across all locations here at Northway. Come on. Can the title get any better? And I know that feeling right now, wherever you're with us. You know what you just experienced? You feel a little safer and secure, don't you? Right? You do, you do. New business cards are being printed. I can't wait to tell my mom. I'm super excited. So, however, today I get to preach to you as we continue in this series called Around the Table, where we've been looking at these accounts of meals that Jesus had with various folks during his time of ministry. And I love the text that I get to preach out today. So I'll be in Luke 19, where you find the story of the wee little man, the tax collector Zacchaeus. So that's where we're going today. But before I get into that, I want to open up with something that, honestly, a couple weeks ago, this was not part of my plan or prep for this sermon. A few weeks ago, I was reading through an Old Testament story, an account, just on my own sort of reading time. And I don't want to over-spiritualize this in any way, but there was a moment as I was reading through this, I just sort of got overwhelmed with the sense that I was supposed to use this in this particular sermon. And God gave me a few thoughts to share, and I thought, well, I'm just going to sort of tuck it at the end of the sermon, but Upon further review, we're going to go through the story of Zacchaeus, but there's something else that's been stirring in me, particularly over the last few days. The story that I was reading was when the nation of Israel, right after they left the period of slavery in Egypt, and God promised them the promised land, but they were intimidated by what they saw there, so they didn't take it. And for 40 years then, they wandered in the wilderness. They settled, basically, in the hill country instead. So stay with me, because I'm going to unpack this a bit as we go through this sermon. But this is the word that, I really feel like is for some of you here today. Sometimes I think we have wandered or settled for so long, we end up thinking it's where we're supposed to stay. And the wilderness was not meant for the people to live in. It was meant for them to pass through. And a couple questions for you is, have you settled somewhere in your life that you were only meant to pass through? You weren't supposed to stay there. And another way of maybe asking the question, are you knowingly, or, hey, sometimes this is really unknowingly, right now, wandering in a wilderness mindset? Maybe you settled into a hill country pattern in your life. Because I believe that there are moments in your life, in our lives, where God desperately wants to call us out of particular patterns and mindsets and lifestyles into something better, something important that he wants to do. And maybe today is going to be that day for you. So let's read through this Zacchaeus account. I'm going to pick up in verse 1 of Luke 19. I'm going to read it straight on through. It says this: he entered Jericho, so this is Jesus, and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And he hurried, he came down, and he received him joyfully. And when they saw it, so this is this massive crowd that's watching this all happen, they all grumbled. He's gone into to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he is also the son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Right in verse 1 there, it said Jesus was passing through Jericho. So he was headed somewhere else. Do you know where he was headed? The end of this chapter, like a few verses later, is the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And at the end of that week, Jesus will be on a cross. Jesus was just passing through Jerusalem. He was headed to, Jesus was just passing through Jericho. He was headed to Jerusalem to die. Two things here I want to point out. One is this, and I'm just going to say this again. Are you knowingly or unknowingly wandering or settled yourself in a place where you were only meant to pass through? And two, this struck me. Jesus is coming down the last stretch of his life here on earth, right? Jerusalem is just around the corner, and he's still not mailing it in, right? He knows the end is near, and he's pouring everything he has into every last encounter. So the second thing here, I just want to pause for a second, and I want to speak to anybody here today across all of our locations that I would consider like a fellow older generation Christ follower, like me, all right? You're coming down the stretch. Don't mail this season in. A boxer that has a really big punch, as he gets older, right? Often his speed goes. His legs aren't as strong. Maybe he doesn't have as good a chin as he once have. But one thing a boxer with a big punch loses last is the big punch. Still got that pop, that power. Older generation, you still have power. And you still got quite a few rounds left. And don't stop looking for that next encounter, an encounter that can impact a life for Christ. As Jesus entered Jericho, it says these massive crowds come out to see him. They've heard probably about his kingdom teaching. They've heard about his challenges to the Pharisees, and certainly they've heard about his miracles. And before Jesus has this encounter with Zacchaeus, the gospel writer Luke, he tells us three things about Zacchaeus that we need to know. One, it says he is the chief tax collector of Jericho. And we've addressed this early in this series, so I'm not gonna go into a lot of great details about it, but as a tax collector in this time, he would have been despised. He was a traitor to his fellow Jews. He worked for the ruling Roman government. He collected taxes like brutally and oppressively. Plus, he had the authority to squeeze extra income out of the people and keep it for himself. Hated. Secondly, he was extremely wealthy. It says he was rich. Jericho, it was along one of the major trade routes at this time. So Zacchaeus, what he would do is set up these tax booths and collect custom taxes on the goods that people were bringing through Jericho to sell. And then he'd set up booths on the way out and he'd tax them again on what they bought on the way out of town. At this time, tax collectors were like pretty much stationed in every town. But there were three main franchises, three large, extremely lucrative franchises. And Zacchaeus owned the one in Jericho. And then there was one in Caesarea and one in Capernaum. And tax collectors, if you had one of those franchises, you would have been one of the most wealthiest people in the entire region. And just by the way, do you know who the tax collector was that had the franchise in Capernaum? It was Matthew, who early in Jesus' ministry saw him sitting in a tax booth and said, "Follow me." And he left that and followed Jesus. Zacchaeus was hated, he was rich, and three, it was recorded he was small of stature. Like, that's a very politically correct way of saying, you're a little guy, right? Short little dude. I remember Sunday school growing up. Anybody? Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he? Climbed up in that sycamore tree for Jesus he could see. Anybody remember that? I asked the bands if they could sing it. They never got back to me to see if I could get it in the set. So in my sermon prep, as I'm studying this, I stumbled across this archaeological study that discovered human remains from this particular region at this particular time. So one of their findings was they determined what the average height of a Semitic man was during this time. Right here, in this region, 1st century. What do you think the average height of a man was in this region at this time? Get this, 5'1" to 5'5" was average. Like, I would have been a superstar in the MEBA, the Middle Eastern Basketball Association. I'd have been a giant, right? I mean, 5'1" to 5'4", how tall was Zacchaeus? That it put in the Bible that he was small. And like average was like a little guy to start with. And somehow they decided to put this in the Bible. He had to be a wee little guy. And the only thing I can picture is like Danny DeVito in a tree with a tunic on. Like that's gotta be what Zacchaeus must have looked like. So there are a couple obvious reasons why Zacchaeus was in the tree that day, right? One, he was too short to see over the crowd. So he got out ahead of the parade, and he climbed up in the tree so that he could see Jesus. And two, I think it was because it was safe up there, because he's hated, right? If he's in a large crowd, man, people are gonna be like trying to catch him with probably trying to catch him with an elbow. I don't know how big he was, with an elbow or two, right? I just wonder if there wasn't one other possible reason that he was in a tree that day. Not just so that Jesus could see him, but also maybe Maybe so that like Jesus would just notice him. Like, do you think that maybe somehow he got out ahead of that? Because, I mean, you would think if Jesus was walking by, like, there's a dude in a tree. I think maybe he just wanted to be seen. I clearly think he wanted to see Jesus, but I don't know. Maybe he just wanted to be seen. Maybe he realized that he'd been wandering and settling for the lifestyle that he was in for too long. And maybe God was nudging him. You know, maybe he was stuck in this selfishness or greed or years of cheating people and loneliness and the fear. And he just decided, well, I wonder if I could get Jesus to see me today. What's stopping you from being seen by Jesus today? You know, where are you wandering in your life right now, or maybe settled? And you continue to maybe say things like, well, someday, God, but not today. Someday, God, I'll give this up, but not today. Someday, God, I'm going to really begin to truly follow you, but not today. Someday, God, I'm going to really begin to be generous, but not today. Someday, God, I'm going to really work on my marriage. Not today. Someday, God, I'm going to put an end to these destructive behaviors in my life, but just not today. Do you have like a someday attitude with Jesus? And is it time for a change? Perhaps you were just meant to pass through this season that you're in right now, but instead you decided to settle. Is it time to maybe climb a tree? You know, here's what I know. If you position yourself to be seen by Jesus, he will see you. Because in the text in Luke 19:5 there, it says, when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and he said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because I'm going to stay at your house today. Jesus saw him and he'll see you too. This is the only time that's recorded in the Bible that Jesus invites himself to someone's house. To American ears, I don't know, like the first time I read that, doesn't it sound sort of like forward or almost like rude? Like, Jesus, like, I'm coming to your house today. You know, I think to American ears, it does. But do you know that in this time and in this culture, that would have been very common. It would have actually been encouraged. If someone were to say to me today, like I'm having a conversation with someone, hey, we should get dinner sometime. What do? Like if it's me, I probably pull up my iPhone and I look about 3 or 4 weeks out and to start see when I might be available. See, in this culture, if someone would have invited you to dinner or said they wanted to have dinner with you, you better go fire up your grill because they're coming that day to your house. That's the way that it worked. What if it was an American in that sycamore tree? You know, he'd have probably said, like, wait, what, today? Like, my house is a mess, and I don't have any food at the house, and it's Wednesday, I watched Survivor, right? You know, I mean, if someone were to invite you to grab lunch with them, like on the spot, this week sometime, somebody says, hey, let's go grab lunch. And let me just push it a little further. What if it was someone that maybe was from a different culture than you, or a different belief system, or a different lifestyle? Would you go? Let's make it a little more personal. Like, what if they invited you to their house that night for dinner? Would you go? Here's a little different direction. What if you're talking to somebody this week and you just get this little nudge that you're supposed to ask them to go to lunch right now? Let's just go grab lunch. Would you do it? Let me ask you to step it up another level. What if God's nudging you to invite somebody to your house for dinner tonight? Would you do it? Maybe it's a new person in your neighborhood. Maybe it's a couple that just moved in. Maybe it's somebody new at work. Maybe it's someone who just had a tragedy or a crisis in their life. Maybe it's something that's really incredibly socially awkward, but you know that they're lonely. Would you invite them? Here's some homework for you to do today. When you go home, whatever you're going to make for dinner tonight, double it and freeze half. There, I just solved your no food issue. And nobody cares if your house is a mess or not. Invite somebody in. You know, when Jesus called out to Zacchaeus, it says he hurried down and he received him joyfully into his house. So I want to go up another level here. Like, if you know it's time for a change in your life and you're willing to position yourself to be able to be seen by Jesus, are you willing to let him interrupt your schedule? Zacchaeus did. And oh, by the way, like, if God wants to do something in your life, he doesn't really need to check your schedule. If he's going to do it, he's just going to do it. I think we all must stay in a place where we're ready to breathe in the presence of God and be interrupted in what it is that he might want to do in that particular moment. If Jesus were to say to you, hey, come down out of that tree because you're going to hurt yourself. Would you? And not someday, today. Would you allow yourself to be interrupted and receive him joyfully? The interruption may be him preparing you for something that he has scheduled for you. See, God did not promise you a schedule. He promised you his Spirit. And his Spirit will tell you when it's time to sit still and wait and when it's to get up and move. After Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection and his ascension back into heaven, the disciples gathered and they waited to receive the Spirit. And when they received it, they got up and they moved in power. We must realize that some of the best things God is going to do in our lives might not be scheduled. When you allow God to reset your schedule, you might think it's an interruption, but it actually might be an invitation to a breakthrough. You know, I remember 10, 12 years ago, I think, I was the lead pastor at the time, and I just kept getting this continual nudge from God, like, Scott, I'm supposed to go visit some of our global mission partners, some of the partners that hadn't been visited in a long, long time. And I was like, someday, but not today. Like, I'm not a traveler. The thoughts of going to China or India or Haiti, I remember like sitting there going, nope, someday, not today. And I just pushed. And finally, you know, by the grace of God, I was like, all right, I'll do it. And it was a dramatic interruption in my schedule. But you know what happened? I saw a person healed from blindness. I got a completely different perspective on the work of God in the world. I sort of snuck into a country and baptized a government official. My faith changed over that season more than it ever has in any other season. I got direction, I got vision, and it was all because I decided to climb a tree and say, okay, God, today, not someday. Zacchaeus allowed his schedule to be interrupted, and he had dinner with Jesus. And I'm not sure who was at the dinner. It doesn't really say. Doesn't record any of the dinner conversation. But at some point, what is recorded is that Zacchaeus, it says, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, do you think that's a short joke there? Like, it says he stood. I like picture saying, Jesus like saying, Zacchaeus, stand up. And he's like, I am. Zacchaeus is like, Jesus is like, I think that's what it is, but I don't know. Zacchaeus sitting there saying, very funny, Jesus. I'm standing. And Zacchaeus stood and he said, Lord, behold, half of the goods of everything I own, I'm going to give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. He gave half of everything to the poor. I don't know how much that was, but as your executive pastor of generosity, I think it's lots. I think it's lots and lots. I'm not sure how much, but the guy was a rich dude. Half of rich is lots. Zacchaeus did not stop there. You know, in the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, it tells us, according to Mosaic law, that if you defrauded somebody, what you were supposed to do, it says this: they must make full restitution for the wrong they have done, add a fifth of the value to it, and give it to the person they've wronged. So basically, the Mosaic law would say, if you rip somebody off $100, you're supposed to give them back 120. Zacchaeus said, no, fourfold. I rip you off $100, I'm giving you $400 back, is what he was doing. What happened at dinner Like that resulted in this guy having such a turnaround that he's making these statements. I believe we get a glimpse of what happened during the dinner conversation by what Jesus said at the very end of the text, right? And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house. This is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, now he's talking about himself, came to seek and to save the lost. What happened? Salvation came. Zacchaeus had lost his way, and Jesus did what Jesus came to do, seek and to save the lost. You know, the nation of Israel at this time, back when they escaped Egypt and were supposed to be headed to the promised land, but they were intimidated by what they saw in the promised land, so they ended up wandering and settling where they were. You know, around the 39th year or so of that wandering, a word came from the Lord. And it's recorded in Deuteronomy. It says this, then the Lord said to the wanderers, to the settlers, you have been traveling around this hill country long enough. Now turn north. The Lord's saying, that's enough. It's time for you to turn north, and not someday, today. Do you recall what the first battle was that the nation of Israel had to face as they entered the promised land? Jericho, the same town Jesus passed through on his way to the cross. The same Jesus that still seeks to save the lost. You know, folks, I'm not sure where you are right now and where it is that you might have settled and that you find yourself wandering, that you might not even know it, but you were just supposed to pass through and you've ended up staying. And what I know about our God, what's amazing, is with this many people in this room and this many people watching at our locations right now, he has the ability to point something out to each and every one of us just like that. All at the same time, different things for every person. And here's my guess, and I'm not gonna assume this, but my guess is somewhere during these last 25 minutes, God put something on your heart where you're wandering or where you've settled, where you were only meant to pass through, but you've stopped. And I don't know what it is, but I want you to take it seriously. And I don't want you to think about it someday, today. Maybe there's a destructive behavior in your life and enough's enough. Turn north. Maybe it's your marriage and it's time to get it right. It's time to go counseling. It's time to dig in. And it's not someday, it's today. Maybe it's a relationship that's gone unreconciled that needs it. Maybe it's time to get married and stop playing house. Maybe it's something at work. But I'm here to tell you, you're only meant to pass through. And you settled. Stop wandering. In a moment, I'll just pray, and I just encourage you, turn that over to God. Take the next step, head north. And then I know there's got to be a couple people here today that when it comes to your faith in Jesus, what you've been doing for so long is saying, someday, but not today. This is your day. Come on. Come on. Best decision I ever made in my life was turning it over to Jesus as like an 18-year-old kid that was lost. And it hasn't been easy, but it's been best. Because I was just passing through those teenage years. I wasn't supposed to stay there. Those behaviors and those thoughts. So just bow our heads right now. Just a quick moment of just a prayer. Like you can use my words, you can use your own, but if it's today, you're tired of settling, you're tired of wandering, you don't care who knows, but today's the day I'm going to start following Jesus. Just these words, your words, Jesus, today, I give you all of me. I follow you with all of my heart today. Thank you for passing through Jericho and going to Jerusalem and hanging on that cross for me. I accept you today as my Lord and Savior. Lift that up in your Son's name. Amen.